Hi guys, Sean here from DigiDirect. Today we're taking a look at the brand new OM System OM1, which is a brand new flagship Micro Four Thirds camera and the first camera to be released under the OM System brand name. Now if that name is not familiar to you, in a nutshell, Olympus sold off its camera division. The company that now owns it is OM Digital Solutions, and OM System is going to be the brand name that's going to carry on what was the Olympus lineup. Going forward, it's going to be the OM System lineup. Now, as an end user, this doesn't really impact you beyond just a slightly different name on your camera because all the previous Olympus lenses and so on are fully compatible here. There's no loss of compatibility there. Also, I'm shooting this video on the OM1 right now. All right, without any further ado, let's take a look at the body. So the body of this camera is pretty reminiscent of the Olympus EM1 III in its size and general look. Size, of course, is a huge part of the appeal of this camera. This is a very small body to house all the features that we'll be discussing. And that's really the point here. The goal of this camera is to be a powerhouse in a small package. So if you're traveling, hiking, or so on, this is a much more appealing package than a much larger and heavier full-frame system. That being said, it is built like a tank. It feels really solid. It's also weather sealed like crazy, rated to IP53 and freeze-proof to -10 degrees Celsius. You'll notice it has both the Olympus and OM System branding on it. The camera has a lot of physical controls across the body, including a joystick and a fully articulating screen. I really like the grip here. For a smaller camera, it doesn't lose grip support, which is really nice. The viewfinder is awesome. It's an OLED with 5.76 million dot resolution, 120 frames per second refresh rate, and very low latency. That's on par with top cameras across the market, and it's a dream to use. It has dual UHS 2 compatible SD card slots and mic, headphone, HDMI, and USB-C ports. The camera has a new BLX1 battery that has 20% more capacity than the previous BLH1. Note it charges via the USB-C port on the side, although you can purchase an external battery charger separately. You can also charge it via a USB power bank, and it can output via HDMI while being charged. They've also updated the menu system here, which is a definite improvement. Olympus menus could be a bit confusing. This new system is much more straightforward and easy to use. The camera also has an internal dust reduction system. Finally, looking at lenses, they're also announcing a new version of the 12-40 f2.8 Pro and a brand new 40-150 f4 Pro. I use this new 40-150 f4 for most of my time with the camera, and it is a beast. It's super sharp, it has a huge focal range. It's equivalent to an 80 to 300 millimeter focal length on a full frame system. With the 12-40 2.8 and 40-150 f4, you can cover a full frame equivalent focal range of 24 to 300 millimeters between those two lenses, in a package that is ridiculously small for that kind of coverage. That's another point in favor of the portability of the system. It's not just the camera, but the lenses too. Internally, the OM1 has a new 20 megapixel stacked BSI Micro Four Thirds sensor. In most cases, 20 megapixels is an absolutely sufficient resolution. If you do need to go above that though, you have the high-res mode. This can take a series of images that it then combines into a single high-res image. You can even do this handheld thanks to the image stabilization system, which we'll talk about shortly, which gives you a 50 megapixel image, or on a tripod where it gives you an 80 megapixel image. Now the OM1 also has a new processor, the TruePic 10, which is 3 times as powerful as the processor on the EM1X. This enables a number of things, but in particular it gives you a slightly expanded ISO range, but also better high ISO performance. So you can shoot at fairly high ISOs on the OM1 and not have excessive noise. That's quite important because high ISO shooting has typically been seen as a bastion for full-frame cameras, so it's really important that the OM1 be able to put up good high ISO performance, and it does. Another benefit of that processor is that it enables an extra stop of dynamic range compared to the EM1X, and it also enables a lot of the powerful autofocus features, which we'll discuss shortly. Of course, carrying on the Olympus tradition, the OM1 features market-leading image stabilization technology. It's rated for 7 stops, and in my opinion, it blows the competition out of the water. I was regularly shooting handheld video at the full telephoto end of the 40-150 lens, which remember is a 300 millimeter full frame equivalent focal length. This is incredibly steady for that extreme focal length. When you zoom out to 12 millimeters on the 12-40, for example, it almost looks like you're shooting from a tripod. This of course benefits photos as well as video. It allows handheld shooting at very low shutter speeds that wouldn't otherwise be possible for still images. Now I'm going to quickly discuss some of what OM System is calling the computational photo modes. Now we talked about high-res mode already. There's also Live ND. This simulates an ND filter on the camera of up to 6 stops. This is really useful because it can allow you to shoot at a slower shutter speed in daylight conditions. When you combine it with the very good image stabilization system on here, you can even get these kind of flowing water shots handheld with no ND filter on the camera, which is quite impressive. There's also live time mode, which is essentially a long exposure photo mode, but you don't have to set the shutter speed in advance and potentially, under or overexpose it. Instead, you can watch the image build up on screen. It will gradually increase in exposure, and when it's the right exposure, you just manually stop it, and then the photo's done. It's really just an easier way to shoot long exposure without any trial and error. Then there's also live composite, which will take an initial exposure and then take subsequent exposures, but the subsequent exposures are only going to record the difference in light compared to the initial exposure. So you can essentially get a background of your shot, and then with the subsequent exposures, you can add more elements of light on it as you see fit, basically at your leisure. This is really useful for light painting, star trails, anything of that nature where you're building up an image of light. It allows you to be really particular with how you do that. There's also focus stacking, HDR, and multiple exposure. Autofocus and burst shooting capabilities are also quite impressive on the OM1, thanks partly to that new processor and also thanks to a brand new cross quad pixel AF system. This is a phase detect system with 1053 AF points and 100% coverage. I was very impressed with this system. It's very fast, it's very accurate. We also have AI Detect AF in here, which allows you to detect certain subjects and track them easily. So we can do this with people, planes, trains, birds. All of those features were in the previous models, but this one now also gains the ability to do that with canines and felines as well. In terms of burst shooting, the camera is pretty nuts. It can shoot 50 frames per second with autofocus tracking and no viewfinder blackout. Now, if you go to autofocus lock, that jumps up to 120 frames per second, which is an almost ludicrous number. That's twice as fast as it was on the EM1X. You also have the Pro Capture feature on here, which is on previous Olympus models. This is a feature where when you're in this mode, if you hold the shutter button down halfway, it's going to continuously shoot and buffer those shots, not saving them, but when you actually press the shutter button down, it'll save the last 70 shots before you press the shutter button. So this is really good if you know there's some action coming on, but you don't know exactly when the action is going to happen. Maybe you press the shutter button just a little bit late, you're going to have the past 70 shots to capture it, so you're really not going to miss the image. At saving 70 shots as well, that's an improvement over the EM1X, which could save the last 35 in Pro Capture mode. For video, the camera can capture up to 4K 60 or up to 240 frames per second in 1080 with internal 8-bit or 10-bit 420 recording. There is no crop in 4K 60 either. The 4K is actually captured in 5K and then downsampled. There's also OM log for a flat picture profile for color grading, and there's no video record limit. Of course, the strong image stabilization that we mentioned earlier also comes in particularly handy for video shooting, makes it very easy to shoot handheld and not get shaky footage. This is very solid. Of course, this doesn't have quite the full video feature set that a dedicated cinema camera would have, but 4K 60 with no crop, no record limit, and combined with a market-leading stabilization system, this makes it a very capable video shooter. Overall, I was extremely impressed with the OM1. The camera has very high-level competency across pretty much all areas, from the build and weather sealing, image stabilization, the autofocus and burst shooting system, its video capabilities, and those handy computational photo modes. Now, what takes it over the top, in my opinion, is that you get all of that in a camera system that is this small and light and compact. I know I already mentioned it, but this camera with the 12 to 40mm and the 40 to 150mm lens is a kit that can shoot basically anything you could possibly want to shoot, yet is still extremely rugged and extremely portable at the same time. I took this exact kit to a wildlife sanctuary for the day to shoot with. By the end of the day, I had no problem carrying it around. It was not an issue with weight or size. Conversely, I've been to the same sanctuary for a day with a full frame camera and a 70 to 200mm lens, and by the end of that day, my back was aching, let me tell you. So pound for pound, I think this is one of the best performing systems out there. If you are someone who cares at all about the size and weight of your camera system and you're not 100% married to full frame, you really deserve it to yourself to take a look at the OM1. Now, the camera will be out in March of 2022. In the meantime, you can pre-order one on our website at www.digidirect.com.au or in one of our stores. We have stores in the Sydney CBD, Bondi Junction, Miranda, the Brisbane and Melbourne CBD, and Cannington, Western Australia, which is just outside the Perth CBD. Thanks, guys. Take care.